Okay, let's jump straight in.
Right.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the essays of Arthur Schopenhauer. We're specifically working from a collection translated by Mrs. Rudolf Dircks.
Yeah, it's a fascinating collection. And the range of sources we have here is pretty surprising, actually.
Oh, what have we got?
Well, there's on authorship and style, on noise, on education, the emptiness of existence, on women, which is
Yeah,
quite something.
heard about that one.
Also, thinking for oneself, dialogues on death and religion, essays on love, physiognomy, suicide. I mean, it really covers a lot of ground.
Wow, okay. So our mission for this deep dive then is to really unpack Schopenhauer's core arguments across all these different topics, drawing directly from this source material.
Exactly. We want to pull out the most striking insights, connect the dots a bit, and try to understand his, let's say, unique perspective.
Definitely unfiltered,
Yeah.
so get ready because you're probably about to see some familiar parts of life through a very, very different lens, often quite critical.
That's putting it mildly.
Okay, so before we dive into the actual essays, the introduction to this collection does give us some glimpses of the man himself.
Yeah, a little context.
And he doesn't sound like the easiest person to get along with.
No, cuddly isn't the word that springs to mind.
Hmm.
The intro mentions his upbringing, how he really resisted the commercial career his family wanted for him.
He was secretly studying instead.
That's right, pursuing his own interests.
And his family life. Sounds kind of strained. That's maybe an understatement.
Definitely. A very difficult relationship with his mother, apparently, leading to a complete break. They just stopped speaking.
Wow. And then later, there was some financial dispute with his mother and sister.
Yeah, and that led to another, 11 years of silence.
So quite isolated, perhaps.
He certainly seemed to see himself as separate, outside the usual academic circles. The source notes his self-perception. No academic echo, not one of a school.
A frank and caustic tongue.
Exactly. He wasn't trying to win any popularity contests.
And that famous quote about his burial place. Anywhere, they will find me. What do you make of that? Confidence. Arrogance.
Maybe a bit of both. A kind of defiant confidence in his work's lasting value, I think. He felt he was committing his work to mankind, trusting it would find its audience eventually, unlike the delusion of the moment he saw around him.
There's also that description of him later in life in Frankfurt, 1859.
Oh yeah, quite vivid.
An old man, but with a lively blue eye and a thin and slightly sarcastic lip, around which there strayed a fine smile.
Gives you a little picture, doesn't it? Behind the sometimes very severe philosophy.
Okay, let's dig into the essays. Starting with his thoughts on, well, thinking, reading, and writing itself. He has some very strong opinions here.
Oh, absolutely. He really lays down the law. He's particularly harsh about writing just for money.
What does he say?
He flat out states it deteriorates the author, and he quotes that Spanish proverb,
Honor and money are not to be found in the same purse.
that's the one. Pretty blunt.
And his classification of authors, I thought that was fascinating. The three types.
Right. Those who write without thinking at all.
Okay.
Those who think while they're writing, which he kind of dismisses, like someone just wandering around hoping to shoot something.
Right. Not very impressive in his view.
And then the really rare ones, the ones who actually think before they write. Like a plan hunt, he says.
And those are the only ones he respects.
Pretty much. He has total contempt for what he calls book manufacturers, compilers who just, take stuff straight out of books without any real thought or processing.
He admits compendia can be useful, but
But he warns that just compiling stuff can create this false sense of intellectual progress.
and he really pushes back against the idea that newer is always better, doesn't he?
Completely. He says real thinkers are rare exceptions, that vermin is the rule. Often he thinks supposed progress is actually retrogressive.
He even criticizes translators who mess with the author's original meaning.
Yeah, thinking they know better. Which leads to his advice on reading.
Focus on the greats.
Exactly. The real authors, the founders, the masters. He even suggests buying secondhand books is a good idea.
He makes that interesting distinction, too, about why a book might be famous. Is it the matter or the form?
Right, the content versus the author's actual mind and style. He says ordinary people can write important books based on matter.
But only great minds produce books valued for their form.
And he laments that the public is usually very much more interested in matter than form.
Like analyzing the chemicals in an old vase instead of appreciating its art.
Precisely that analogy. He thinks it misses the point.
And don't get him started on anonymous criticism.
Oh boy. Calls it literary fraud. The critic is a wretch.
Says it carries no more weight than an anonymous letter. Basically worthless.
And misquoting. That's horrid baseness and roguery. He really does not hold back.
Clearly not. What about style itself?
He calls style the physiognomy of the mind.
More reliable than someone's actual face.
That's his claim. In trying to imitate someone else's style, it's like wearing a dead mask. Pointless and kind of creepy.
He thinks you can judge an author's depth really quickly, from just a few pages.
Yeah, like Diogenes judging a man by his walk. He believes mediocre writers try to hide their lack of substance with complicated or showy styles.
Losing that naivete he values.
Right, which he thinks belongs to superior minds. He really saves his venom for verbose, obscure writing.
The Hegelians get a special mention, I think.
They do. He accuses them of trying to sell words for thoughts, just creating an appearance of intellect.
He has that great line. Nothing is easier than to write that no one can understand.
On the other hand, nothing is more difficult than to express learned ideas so that everyone must understand them. Brilliant.
Exactly. Trying too hard just makes him suspicious. True thinkers, he says, express themselves purely, clearly, definitely, concisely.
Simplicity is key.
It's a sign of truth and genius, in his view. Style is the silhouette of thought.
So vague style equals vague thought.
Yep. Distinguished minds use few words for much thought. Mediocrity, many words for little thought. Truth that is naked is the most beautiful.
That's his aesthetic. Simplicity makes the deepest impact. He compares Goethe's directness to Schiller's more rhetorical style.
And true brevity isn't just about being short. It's about cutting the fat without losing clarity or grammar. He criticizes false brevity.
Right. And he sees writing as a kind of dialogue. The style needs to be objective, almost compelling the reader to grasp the author's exact thought.
Careless writing, using wrong words. It shows you don't value your own ideas.
That's his take. If you don't care enough to express it right, why should anyone else care?
Okay, so shifting from the writer to the reader, his views on reading are also quite pointed.
Yeah, he sees reading largely as a substitute for one's own thoughts, like putting your mind in leading strings.
So not entirely positive.
Not at all. He warns that lots of books just lead you down wrong paths. Thinking for yourself is like having a compass.
So when should you read, according to him?
Only when your own thoughts have kind of stalled out. Use books to import new material, but don't rely on them.
And he has a really strong warning about reading too much.
Oh, yeah. He says it makes the mind lazy, unaccustomed to thinking for itself. You can literally read yourselves stupid.
Like someone who only rides a horse and forgets how to walk.
That's his analogy. Very vivid.
And he thinks you can tell an original thinker from just a book philosopher.
He claims so. The original thinker has earnestness, directness, originality. The book philosopher, just secondhand ideas, dullness, cliches. He contrasts Lichtenberg with Herder.
And you can't just become a good writer by reading a lot.
Nope. His final word seems to be that active thinking is the real source. Reading is just a tool, maybe even a dangerous one if you overuse it.
All right, let's shift gears completely. From the mind to something much more, well, physical and annoying. Noise.
Yes. Schopenhauer on noise. He gets surprisingly worked up about this.
It's not just a minor irritation for him, is it?
Not at all. He describes it as genuinely painful, especially for intellectual types. He even cites biographies of great writers complaining about it.
Calls it the most impertinent of all interruptions, something that shatters thought.
Right. And he connects an inability to be bothered by noise with, frankly, a kind of mental dullness.
People with coarse quality and strong texture of their brain tissues.
Exactly. He claims those same people are also insensitive to argument, poetry, art. It's quite a sweeping judgment.
And he has a particular target, whips.
Oh, the infernal cracking of whips in the streets, he goes on about it, calls it unwarrantable and disgraceful, something that steals peace from life.
He thinks tolerating it is just stupidity and thoughtlessness.
And that it actively paralyzes the brain, destroys all meditation, and murders thought. Strong words.
He doesn't see any need for it either, calls it wanton.
Purely wanton. An impudent defiance from manual workers against head workers, as he puts it. He suggests a simple knot would solve the problem.
He even brings in Thomas Hood's quote about Germans being noisy.
Yeah, attributing it to their insensibility and obtuseness. He wasn't afraid to generalize.
And he kind of hopes more refined nations will set a better, quieter example.
It's clear, for a thinker like him, needing quiet concentration, noise felt like a direct physical assault.
Okay, what about education? Did he have complaints there too? Shocker.
You guessed it. His main beef with education, as he saw it, was that it stuffs kids' heads with ideas and opinions before they've had a chance to actually observe the world for themselves.
Like putting the cart before the horse.
Or his analogy,
Yeah.
a child coming into the world with its feet foremost. Very awkward. He thinks it leads directly to prejudice.
So these ideas, learned early through words, are disconnected from real experience.
Exactly. And he thinks they have to kind of clash and correct each other later in life for genuine understanding, for maturity to develop.
So what should youth be focused on then?
Primarily collecting facts, learning specific things, mathematics, languages, science, history. The concrete stuff.
Judgment comes later.
Much later, with maturity and experience. You shouldn't try to force it early or fill kids with prejudice beforehand.
He does acknowledge memory is strong in youth.
Yes, so it should be exercised, but very carefully.
Yeah.
Choose what is memorized wisely, because those early impressions, especially before age 12, really stick.
And the knowledge needs to fit the child's level of understanding at the time.
Right. Match the intellectual grasp.
And he throws in a warning about novels, too.
Yeah, he worried they depict a world that does not exist in real life, potentially misleading young people who take it all as gospel.
Okay, let's move into some of the really core philosophical stuff now. Existence, time, death. His view of life itself is famously not cheerful.
No, bleak is often the word used. He sees existence as this constant fighting and mighty struggling, an incessant thwarting of everything you try to do.
Life is becoming without being. What does that mean exactly?
It means we're always in flux, always striving, always continually wishing without being satisfied. There's no stable state of contentment, just constant chasing.
And time plays a big role in this view.
Huge. He sees time, the fact that everything passes and vanishes, as the ultimate proof of the futility of all this striving by the will to live. Time makes everything turn to nothing in our hands.
Our existence is just temporary, a flow, like that watermill analogy.
Exactly. Existentia fluxa. The form might seem the same, but the substance is always changing, always floating away. It's not solid.
And he boils down the driving forces of this whole struggle to something quite basic.
Very basic. Just two simple impulses, hunger and the instinct of sex.
Helped along a bit by boredom, maybe.
Perhaps a little. But those are the core drivers, keeping the whole painful show on the road, in his view.
He links consciousness to our physical, finite life.
Right. And the alternative, the escape, is what he calls infinite eternal rest. He borrows Plato's term otos, the truly existing being.
And the way to get there is through denying the will to live.
That's the path he proposes, turning against that relentless striving.
He even sees death itself as proof that we as individuals aren't the ultimate reality, the thing in itself.
Yet the fact that we must die shows our individual form is limited and not eternal.
He contrasts the start of life, hope, enjoyment with the end, decay, death.
A stark contrast. And past happiness, just a ghost of a remembrance.
It's the very form of time itself, he says, that shows how vain earthly pleasures are. They just disappear.
Right. And the sources include that dialogue about indestructibility with Thrasymachos and Phil.
Yeah, tell us about that. Thrasymachos asks what happens after death.
Yes, and Phil gives Schopenhauer's answer, basically. He distinguishes your individuality, your specific self, which exists in time and so begins and ends,
Okay.
from your true being, the underlying reality, the thing in itself, which is outside time, eternal, and not limited to any one person.
So after death, the individual you is nothing.
Correct. But the true being, the fundamental reality you're part of, is and remains everything.
Hence all and nothing.
Exactly. Phil admits it sounds contradictory, but says that's because we're trying to grasp something timeless, something transcendent, using our time-bound understanding. It kind of does violence to the concept.
But Thrasymachos isn't buying it.
Not at all. He wants his individual self to continue. He says he wouldn't give a sou, not a penny, for an immortality where he loses his specific personality.
Phil tries to argue that clinging to individuality is irrational.
Yeah, he points out, we accept losing individuality temporarily in sleep or unconsciousness, so why reject losing it permanently? He sees individuality as a limitation, something we're better off losing.
Being freed from it is a gain.
That's Phil's argument. It's childish, he says, to cling to it once you realize your individual life is just one expression of this universal will to live.
But the Thrasymachos just calls it childish philosophical nonsense.
Right. The dialogue really highlights how counterintuitive and For many, unsatisfying Schopenhauer's idea of transcending individuality can be. People are attached to their specific selves.
Let's look at another dialogue then, the one on religion. Again, it's a debate format between Phil and Demup.
Right. And Dimop takes the, let's say, pragmatic view. He argues religion is necessary, especially for the masses.
He sounds a bit condescending about them. Crude minds, awkward intelligences.
Yeah, very much so. He thinks ordinary people are too caught up in petty pursuits to grasp deep truths directly. So, religion provides symbolic meaning, proclaims the high import of life in a way they can understand.
And it helps keep order, maintain the state, justice, law.
That's Demos' claim. He even uses the ancient Greeks as a counterexample, saying they lacked dogma and managed fine, but suggests maybe religion was needed later to tame the savagery of migrating peoples, like a dam.
He sees it as having some positive potential, too. Strengthening goodness, providing motives via oaths, confession.
Yes, catering to different levels. Ultimately, for Demop, it's a necessary evil because people are, well, weak-minded.
But Phil takes a much harder line.
Much harder. He thinks it's unjust to dumb down metaphysics for the masses, arguing it actually holds back higher understanding. And he attacks the foundation, belief based on revelation. Inoculated in childhood, not reason.
And he points to history, the negative consequences.
Oh, yeah. He lists the thugs in India, misguided missions, how theism with God and the devil supposedly hid nature, burning heretics like Bruno, religious wars, the Inquisition, St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. It's a grim list.
He directly challenges the idea that you need religion for law and order.
Absolutely. Calls it false, pointing back to the ancients again. He fundamentally sees religion as a lie or deception because it claims literal truth, but is only true symbolically in sensu allegorico.
And that deception is the incurable mischief.
Right. He uses that striking analogy.
Right.
Belief and knowledge bear the same relation to each other as the two scales of a balance. When the one rises, the other must fall.
He's suspicious of philosophers who seem religious, too.
Yeah, he dismisses it as often just political devotion, useful for propping up power. Altar and throne are closely related, he notes.
And he questions whether Christianity actually made people morally better.
He contrasts medieval horrors with ancient virtues and criticizes religious practices becoming substitutes for real morality, like the English Sunday observance or slave owners expecting heaven just for showing up at church.
True morality, like pity, comes from elsewhere.
It's independent of religion, in Phil's view. He's cynical about oaths preventing crime, points to priestly corruption, sees devotional exercises as dodging real moral effort. Religion, for him, is an abuse of metaphysical needs exploited for power.
He sees it fading as humanity matures.
Yeah, like a child outgrowing its nurse. Belief based on authority and miracles is for the childhood of humanity. He hopes for a time of naked truth without myth and fable, and euthanasia of religion.
Wow, how does the dialogue end?
They basically agree to disagree, but Phil gets the last word, saying the after effects are the true ones, and quoting that Spanish proverb, "Detrás de cruz está el diablo."
Behind the cross stands the devil.
A pretty clear statement of his perspective, voiced through Phil. Religion as a necessary but often dangerous deception.
Okay, let's tackle the metaphysics of love. I suspect this isn't going to be hearts and flowers.
Not remotely. If you're looking for romance, Schopenhauer's not your guy. His whole take on love is completely tied into his philosophy of the will.
So all the drama, the intensity, the sacrifices, it's not about us as individuals.
Not primarily, no. He argues it's all about the species, the future generation. When you're intensely in love, your individual will is basically being hijacked by the will of the species.
Love affairs are the meditatio compositionis generationis futuri, contemplating the composition of the future generation.
Exactly. The highs and lows of love are transcendent because they relate to the species' welfare, which is vastly more important in his view than individual happiness. Think body versus surface area.
So it's a biological drive disguised as admiration.
That's it. The sexual instinct wears the mask of objective admiration, but underneath it's just serving the species' needs. Nature uses stratagems and illusion.
We're basically tricked, thinking it's about our own desires, but we're just pawns of the species.
We're carried away by a chimera, he says, duped into serving nature's ends.
And the sense of beauty, what's its role?
It guides the instinct, makes it more refined than just a repulsive necessity. Everyone instinctively desires traits that represent the purest type of the species.
And he gets incredibly specific about what those traits are.
Oh, incredibly detailed. It's all about producing the best possible offspring. correcting imperfections.
Like physical health, strength, beauty, symmetry.
Right. Age preferences men for youth, women for older men, even things like plumpness, good teeth, small mouth, prominent chin, eyes, the nose. He argues we're unconsciously drawn to people who compensate for our own physical flaws.
And psychological traits, he links those to the father.
Yes, he claims psychical qualities are inherited from the father. So a woman is drawn to a man's character, his willpower, determination, courage, honesty, goodness, but not primarily his intellect.
Which explains, in his view, why intelligent women might marry less intelligent men. Because genius is an abnormity.
That's his theory. He thinks this drive often leads to marriages between very different types of people, intellectually and temperamentally.
He also talks about relative considerations, like masculinity and femininity balancing out.
Yeah, the most manly man seeks the most womanly woman, and vice versa, to correct any one-sidedness. He thinks the highest degrees of love come from this perfect balancing act.
And correcting type aberrations, like aiming for dark hair and eyes.
Yes, he saw white skin as unnatural, bleached, and believed nature was always trying to return to what he considered the original type: dark hair, brown eyes, citing Hindus and gypsies. Fair hair and blue eyes were deviations to be corrected.
This leads him to conclusions about fidelity, too, doesn't it?
It does. He argues man is naturally inclined to inconstancy, seeking quantity for the species, while woman is naturally constant, needing a long-term protector for offspring.
So for him, marriage fidelity is artificial for men, natural for women.
That's his claim. And why, he argues, female infidelity is much more serious and unforgivable from the species perspective.
What about passionate love? Is that just instinct, too?
It's a more intense, individualized form of the instinct. It serves the species in a special way, focusing on creating a very specific individual, which makes it nobler than just indiscriminate desire. Quality over quantity.
The yearning of love, ameros, is the sigh of the spirit of the species.
A very poetic phrase for it. This immense feeling trapped in a mortal individual. He thinks it's the source of all great love poetry.
Love at first sight is a sympathy of blood.
Yeah, another nod to the deep biological species-level connection he sees.
So losing a beloved is the worst pain because it's a loss for the species.
Exactly. The individual is secondary.
Lovers are just dupes of the will of the species, sacrificing their own happiness.
That's the tragic view. He uses Petrarch as an example. If his love had been fulfilled, his poetry would have stopped, like a bird stops singing after laying its eggs.
So marriage is usually a battle between individual happiness and the species' goals.
A fundamental conflict. This whole elaborate dance of attraction is nature's way of ensuring genetic correction and producing specific types of offspring. It's the will to live, desperately wanting to continue, using us as its instruments.
Not exactly romantic.
Not in the slightest. It's biological determinism, really.
And that brings us, maybe inevitably, to his essay on women. Now, we really need to preface this section.
Absolutely. It's vital for you, the listener, to understand that what follows are Schopenhauer's specific views as presented in this source material.
They are deeply controversial, reflect the biases of his time, and are frankly offensive by modern standards. We are outlining them here solely as part of the source text analysis.
We are not endorsing these views in any way, but they are a significant part of this collection of essays. And importantly, they stem directly from that philosophy of the will of the species we just discussed.
Right. His core premise seems to be that women exist entirely for the propagation of the race.
That's the starting point for almost everything else he says here. He argues, nature gives girls beauty and charm for just a few years, specifically to ensnare a man for this purpose.
And that this charm often fades after children are born.
Yes, because their primary biological purpose, in his view, has been served.
He suggests their interests reflect this love, conquests, fashion, dancing over domestic duties.
Again, linking it back to attracting a mate for propagation.
And intellectually, he doesn't rate them highly.
No, he calls them intellectually short-sighted, focus only on what's immediate, lacking perspective on the past or future. He admits they might have more sober judgment sometimes, but claims they lack the reasoning powers.
He does say they have more sympathy.
More sympathy for the unfortunate, yes, but then claims they're inferior in justice, honesty, and conscientiousness. He argues the present moment governs them more than abstract principles. They lack secondary qualities of virtue.
And then there's that claim about dissimulation, deceit.
One of his most extreme claims, he calls it an innate faculty, their natural weapon for protection, like claws or horns on an animal. He asserts it's natural for them to dissemble.
And this is the source of falseness, faithlessness, treachery, ungratefulness.
That's his harsh conclusion, and he even justifies it, in a twisted way, through the species. He posits this unconscious innate moral, where women feel justified deceiving men because they are serving the higher purpose of the species.
Saying their conscience is clearer about this than men realize.
Exactly. A very disturbing argument.
He also claims they lack the objectivity needed for great art or lasting intellectual work. Cites painting.
Yes, argues they can't achieve anything truly great, genuine, and original. He even quotes another writer, Huarte, to back this up.
He sees the sexes as fundamentally unequal, quantitatively and qualitatively different.
Like positive and negative poles, he says. A clear hierarchy.
And he thinks the West got it wrong with gallantry and respect for women, prefers the ancient or Eastern view.
He explicitly praises the ancient and Eastern understanding of woman's true position, calling Western attitudes Christian Teutonic stupidity and absurd veneration.
He calls the European lady a false position. A false position.
Yes, a monster, not fit for honor or equal rights. He thinks they should be raised simply as housekeepers, trained to be domesticated and submissive.
He even criticizes monogamy.
He does, arguing it creates masses of unhappy women, citing the large number of prostitutes in London as human sacrifices on the altar of monogamy. He sees them as the inevitable flip side of the pretentious European lady.
And suggests polygamy would be better for women as a whole?
Astonishingly, yes. He argues it would return them to their proper and natural place as a subordinate being, getting rid of both the lady and the unhappy outcasts.
His views on inheritance follow this logic, too.
Completely. He thinks women inheriting capital is disastrous because men make money and women just squander it. He suggests they should only get life interest secured by a mortgage, not control of the capital, unless there are no male heirs.
And his final thoughts. Women need a master.
Yes. Left independent, he claims, they'll inevitably attach themselves to a man, a lover if young, a priest if old. And he distinguishes paternal love, metaphysical self-recognition, from maternal love, instinctive, fading when the child is no longer helpless.
Okay, again, these are extremely challenging views from the source material, rooted entirely in his specific and deeply problematic philosophical framework.
Precisely. Important to understand where they come from within his system, but impossible to read today without serious critique.
Let's move to another difficult topic, suicide. His perspective here is also quite unconventional, isn't it?
Very much so. He challenges the prevailing moral and religious condemnation. He argues that only monotheistic religions, specifically what he calls Jewish religions, really treat suicide as a crime.
Despite no clear biblical ban.
Right. He dismisses the standard arguments against it, religious or philosophical, as just weak sophisms.
He uses that emotional comparison on how we feel about a friend's crime versus their voluntary death.
Yeah, indignation versus sorrow, compassion, maybe even admiration. He uses this to argue it shouldn't be seen as a crime in the same way.
He points to the ancients again. They didn't see it as a crime.
Generally not. He mentions places like Massilia and Cios, where poison was sometimes provided for legitimate reasons, quotes Pliny on a timely death, and notes Aristotle's view of it being a wrong against the state, not necessarily immoral in itself, contrasting him with Plato.
He mentions Hume's suppressed essay, too.
Yes, praising Hume for refuting the arguments against suicide and condemning the shameful bigotry and gross ecclesiastical tyranny that led to the essay being suppressed.
So why does suicide happen, according to Schopenhauer?
Simply when the terrors of life outweigh the terrors of death. The only thing holding people back, he thinks, is the instinctual fear of death because it means the destruction of the body, the manifestation of the will to live.
Great mental suffering can override that fear, make it easier.
That's his observation. It can make one numb to physical pain.
He calls suicide an experiment, asking nature about death.
Yeah, but an awkward one, he says, because it destroys the very consciousness that's asking the question and waiting for the answer.
And he thinks religious condemnation comes from optimism.
From a kind of gross optimism that doesn't want to be contradicted or denounced by the act of suicide itself. It's a psychological and philosophical analysis completely detached from conventional morality.
Okay, finally. Besides these big essays, the collection includes lots of shorter psychological observations. Let's touch on a few of those.
Yeah, scattered insights. He has a take on modesty, for instance.
What's that?
He sees it as appropriate, honest, in someone with moderate talent. But in someone with great talent, he thinks modesty is actually hypocrisy.
So great minds should just own it.
Seems to be his view. No false modesty needed.
He comments on childhood indoctrination, too.
Right, how beliefs, even absurdity, can be drilled in before they are 6 years old by continual and earnest repetition. He compares it to training animals.
In that interesting note on memory and smell,
Yeah, he finds odors particularly powerful for recalling past scenes. He even speculates about senses linking to faculties, sight to understanding, hearing to reason, smell to memory.
touch and taste are about direct contact, the real.
Right, and intoxication. He notes it enhances memory of the past, but messes up recall of the present.
He calls arithmetic the basest mental activity, because a machine can do it.
Kind of dismissive, yeah. An early commentary on automation, perhaps.
Habit for him is just laziness, avoiding mental effort.
Pretty much. The force of inertia applied to the mind.
His view on enjoyment and pain is quite stark, too.
Very. Enjoyment is negative, just the removal of pain. Pain is the positive real state. He uses that analogy of the stomach for good fortune being bottomless, but the entrance to it is narrow.
Hope keeps us going, but revenge is a great pleasure.
Disturbingly, yes. He notes revenge has sweetened an otherwise bitter death for many.
He distinguishes moroseness from melancholy.
Yeah, melancholy is closer to happiness. It attracts sympathy. Moroseness just repels. He also describes hypochondria causing unreasonable anger and fear.
That analysis of relief when something bad is postponed.
Right. The conflict between wanting to get it over with, stronger but distant, and wanting peace now, weaker but immediate, like a small nearby object blocking a larger distant one.
And understanding life is like looking at a mosaic from a distance.
Exactly. You only see the pattern, the meaning, the beauty when you step back. You can't see it clearly while you're right in the middle of it.
He thinks it's hard to see our own faces objectively. Ego gets in the way.
Yeah, egoism interferes, and his advice on judging others is pretty cynical.
Trust first impressions of faces. Acquaintance leads to deception.
Basically, if people gain on further acquaintance, he thinks it just means they delude us. Better not to talk to them if you want to see them clearly, or watch them when they don't know you're watching.
He links walking style to intelligence.
Gait and arm movement, yeah. He thinks stupid people move heavily or slowly.
And gestures reflect the form of conversation, not the content.
Right. Arguing, complaining, explaining. The gestures show the structure, which he felt philosophers had missed. And he contrasts the predictable common man, like manufactured goods, with the isolated great individual. Vulgarity brings us down to the animal level.
So, wow. We have covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive into Schopenhauer's essays.
We really have, from, practical advice on writing to the intense annoyance of noise.
All the way to these profound, often very difficult ideas about existence, the illusion of love, the finality of death.
It's all filtered through his incredibly distinct, critical, and often controversial viewpoint, drawn straight from these texts.
His takes on women, religion, even love are just so far from conventional thinking. But you can see how they connect back to his core philosophy.
Absolutely. It's all rooted in that idea of the will, the power of the species, the often deceptive nature of our drives.
And even if you find some of his ideas difficult, or frankly reject them entirely.
Which many will.
The sources definitely provide incredibly detailed observations and, well, a lot to chew on.
They certainly make you think.
They absolutely do.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawing from all this.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer argues that our striving is mostly futile, that existence itself is painful, that love's basically a biological trick.
A cheerful summary.
Right. So, given all that, how do you find or define meaning and value in your own life? Do you lean towards Schopenhauer's implied conclusion that the goal should be to somehow transcend or deny this relentless will to live?
Or do you find value precisely in the striving, the connecting, the experiencing, even if you saw it as ultimately futile or illusory? Something to consider.